Are we all set? Good? Okay, well, as I'm sure you all know, my name is Justin Menda. I'm all over the email. And I've been a bit of a nomad career-wise, but there have been a few common threads. And one of them has been the spirit embodied by this Bertrand Russell quote, which I hope you had a chance to check out. It's really one of my driving forces, and I hope in the span of this short talk I can get you all to hang a question mark on something that you may or may not have taken for granted. And I want to begin by giving you a hypothetical. Imagine you are running a hospital, and you have to select an open heart surgeon. And you have two candidates in front of you. One of them summarizes his resume as follows. He says, I have spent the last 10 years swimming in the cutting edge literature on open heart surgery, on every level of hospital operations, and on medical practice generally. I can quote chapter and verse on any study you care to mention. I know all the big players in the field personally. My list of publications is a mile long. And I've even had the chance to observe and participate in surgeries myself. Needless to say, of course, I've achieved the maximum possible score on every single test I've taken from my SAT through my boards. That's candidate one. Candidate two says, I spent the past 10 years as a qualified, successful open heart surgeon. Whom do you choose? Obviously. Now, I mean, if you're anything like me, you're not just thinking the answer is obvious. Part of you is a little bit indignant that I've even asked you the question. And the only thing mitigating your frustration is the knowledge that I'm obviously kidding. Right? That's how crashingly obvious, to borrow a phrase from the philosopher Daniel Dennett, the answer is to this question. You pick the second candidate. Right? Well, I'm going to bother you a little more by asking you why. Because no one seriously thinks that candidate two can do everything that candidate one can do and more. If you think about it, right? Nobody seriously thinks that the fact that you've been a qualified surgeon for 10 years means that you're up on all the research. I mean, if nothing else, welcome, Peter. If anything else, research moves too quickly, human memory is too fallible, and life is too short. And so we fully expect experience to come at some expense to book learning. And you know what? I'm sure everybody in this room would be completely happy to make that trade. Because we understand intuitively, and with every fiber in our being, and in every context, from picking a babysitter to selecting who gets to try to save our lives, that doing something is what generates real expertise. And that reading and talking about something is a poor substitute at best. So, why are our schools made of classrooms? Why are teacher-led instruction and students in desks with textbooks the basic units of our schools? And when it comes to things like field trips, science labs, internships, and so on, why are those the things that students get to do when they're well-behaved and when the school has extra money, instead of the alpha and the omega of the experience, maybe with some top-down instruction textbooks as supports? Where is that crashingly obvious intuition we just talked about, which rules every other aspect of our lives? And why is the public education system, which is supposed to be our society's training ground for life, the one area in which that intuition is lost? And of course, it's not just lost, right? It's completely inverted. Schools are not places where kids do. They're places where kids read and talk about doing. Or are they? I mean, everyone knows the phrase learn by doing. I prefer to say you learn what you do. In other words, and I think this is another intuition that we all share, whatever a person is doing is what they are learning. And it's not as though, even in a traditional classroom, students are completely idle. The fellow who just joined us, his name is Peter Burks, and I hope you all get a chance to meet and talk with him after the talk. He runs an organization called Open Connections, which is a learning center serving homeschoolers on a progressive education model out in Edgemont. And I'll never forget one of the things he said on the first day that we met. He said, listen, there's nothing wrong with education. It happens all the time. It's completely natural. Humans do it innately. It's like breathing. What's in question is air quality. Did I get that about right? So what's the air like in our schools? What are our students doing in their classrooms? And what could they learn about? What could they learn by it? Well, surely they could be learning to read. They could be learning to communicate. They could learn something about the value of being on time. They could learn something about focusing on boring tasks. So far, so good, right? Who could object to that? I'm sure anybody could come up with a long list of careers for which that's a good foundation. So maybe things aren't as bleak as the doomsayers would have us believe. But of course, there's more. Think of the structure of a classroom. What's it like in there? By definition, structurally. What are students doing in that environment? And the one thing that they're doing across all classrooms, no matter what the subject, no matter who the teacher is that they're sitting down, shutting up, and listening to the teacher. Now, what kind of jobs require that skill set? In what other context in your life, in what desirable job, does somebody else get to have complete authority over what is and isn't relevant? Now, there are a couple other ways we can ask the question. I really like this wording. What kind of person are we selecting for through our schools? And what kind of person are we selecting against? In other words, what kinds of attributes will help you succeed in this system, in a system that's structured this way? And what kinds of attributes will cause you to fail? So, never mind all of the mission statements and standards and standardized testing and everything. If we cut through all that, what do our schools structurally tell our students about what we value in a person? And does that message bear any relationship with what we claim to value as a society and what we need as a country? I mean, it's almost a tired old trope at this point that our businesses are struggling to find creative and technically competent talent domestically. Right? And it's definitely a tired old trope that our students lack self-actualization, resilience, and accountability. And one of the things that people tend to do when they realize these things, when they really take in those facts, is that they like to look abroad for solutions. They look to other countries that are having success with their education systems. And that gets confusing rather quickly because different countries achieve success by different methods. But there are some common threads, and one of the common threads is an alignment between schools and culture. South Korea can cram 40 kids into a classroom and not have chronic class management issues because their society supports authority. Finland makes education equity work. In other words, as soon as you walk in the door of that school, doesn't matter how rich or poor your family is, doesn't matter where you came from, you're just as well fed as everyone else, you get access to just the same opportunities as everyone else, and all schools have roughly the same outcomes. If they need more, they get more, in terms of funding and resources and so on. They make education equity work because their society, in many ways, and the ideology that unites their citizens, is heavily biased in favor of equity. So again, in every case, I want to highlight that. There has to be an alignment between the schools and the values of the culture. So what are we about? What's American culture about? I'm going to throw out a few things. One of them is entrepreneurialism. I think we can all agree that we value that generally as a country. Leadership. Seeing failure as an opportunity. And here's something that you may not have thought about, but it seems true to me. An emphasis on demonstration and evidence over tradition and authority. We still have a long way to go with regards to some institutional racism and sexism, but compared to other countries, generally speaking, we don't particularly care where you're from. What we care about is what you can do, what you can show us. It's not sit down and shut up. It's put up or shut up. Now, can anyone think of just one school that's actively making those values work on every level? And again, I'm not talking about mission statements and all that stuff. I'm talking about structurally. I can think of a few. Very few. One of them is the Rocket Ship Network of schools down in California, which if you've been listening to Marketplace on NPR, they talked about a couple weeks back. One of them is the Sustainability Workshop here in Philadelphia, operating under the aegis of the University of Pennsylvania. And one of them is Open Connections in Edgemont, run by Peter Burks. This is the minority, obviously. Plenty of other schools talk about this stuff, obviously. But the implementation, in the end, is always some variation on the same model. And the model is sit down, shut up, and listen to the teacher. Now, I'm dwelling on this because I think it's difficult to overstate our hypocrisy on this point. We are perfectly willing to demand things like entrepreneurialism, leadership, and technical skill from our students and from our schools, as well as things like motivation and accountability. We write them into our standards. Politicians and pundits scream about them all the time in every venue where they can. Meanwhile, what we're actually doing to our youth in our